Hi, welcome back, everyone. So we're ready to join our panel, Technology and the Intelligence Cycle, Mind the Gaps. And so here, we're going to turn this over to JP Ratajczak, my fellow CI fellow, who will be the moderator. And joining him will be Julie Dawson, Director of Regulatory and Policy at Yoti, Antonia Diederich, Personnel Manager at Daimler Trucks, and Bob Gorley, CTO and co-founder of OODA Loop. Over to you, JP.
Excellent, Cynthia. And thanks. Well, you've already dropped off, but I was going to say it would be great to just appreciate our last session. So I don't know if you find how important this was, but we had two competing vendors to people who provide software solutions to this community, talking amicably, talking for 45 minutes without trying to sell their product at all. And I think as we look at this whole summit, this is one of the great things about it that we can all appreciate, I think, this forum that we have. And this one that we have for this particular panel is also very special. We have an international representation, people from all different sectors, different backgrounds, different experiences. So we'll introduce that panel here in just a moment, but to set the context for what we're talking about in this particular session, as Cynthia said, we're talking about technology and the intelligence cycle. And we're thinking about how there are all of those technology solutions, which we've done a great job covering already today, thinking about what are those different tools, those different techniques that we have available to us. But the arc of this session extends a little bit further into what are those things that parts of the intelligence cycle that don't necessarily have any kind of tool or application available to them, and what can we be looking for, whether it's in other industries, whether it's other developments that can help us as CI practitioners, as decision makers, to be able to be prepared for the future and understand what's coming at us. So again, this panel that we have here is going to be able to talk to that remarkably. I will ask you, toss your questions into the chat pane there. We'll be watching that. Pepper these fine speakers with your thoughts, with your comments, because this is really a summit. It's an interactive experience and not just a question interview type session that we have here. So with that said, my name is JP Ratajczak. I work at Nationwide, the insurance and financial services company, and I'm the director of competitive intelligence there. I'm also a CI fellow. I've been doing this for a couple decades. So my background is in technology, in the intelligence world. So I'm really excited to have this talk. And what I'll do is I'll hand it over to each of our panelists first to give a little bit about their background, where they're coming from, and some of the things that they're looking forward to as we talk about this. So let's start off with Bob. We'll start off with you.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Bob Gorley, and I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer of a consultancy called OODA. OODA is an acronym. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. Famous military and decision-making strategy that I hope many competitive intelligence professionals know very well. I wanted to say my background was an operational Navy intelligence officer. My job was bring all the information together from every source, plan, collection, create analysis, disseminate that analysis to decision makers in the face of a very dynamic situation. And I did that in the Navy, but it was a very joint kind of career. At the end of my 20-year career, I was doing that for the new missions of cyber conflict. So how do you do intelligence support to cyber conflict? I then left the Navy, spent some time in industry. I went back to government as the Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So a lot of background in tools and interoperable tools and knowledge creation and dissemination and interacting with customers, and would love to answer any questions you have on any of that. So that's me in a nutshell, and I really believe that technology is critically important and is a fantastic enabler. Everybody talks about how the human element is most important, and I believe that, but this is a technology-enabled world, and I think we should be very proud of the fact that we competitive intelligence professionals can learn and use and implement technology to advantage.
Well, but Bob, and we'll look forward to talking about some of those tools, maybe not the ones you have behind you, but some of those other things that we have available to us. So Julie, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, JP. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Dawson, and I'm from Yoti, a digital identity company. So I feel like I'm in a totally different world here. we look at how do people prove who they are or how old they are face to face or online. And my role at Yoti is looking at our ethical framework. So looking at the human rights, consumer rights, last mile tech and accessibility around proving who you are and how old you are. I look at the different accreditations around data responsibility, cybersecurity, and then the different governments around the world that are thinking about digital identity, lots of whom are building trust frameworks, and lots of sectors who are building trust frameworks looking at verified identity. So it was really interesting last week and in the previous weeks with JP when we were thinking, where does this intersect with the world of CI? Where would it help you to know, for instance, that this member of staff, this source, this researcher, that somebody is verified or something about someone was verified? Where would it be helpful for you to have a verification to a level of an augmented e-signature? Where might it just be something that is an additional bonus? So a lot of different things for us to tease apart, but it already has made me think a lot about of the different sectors where there intersects. So thank you for inviting me tonight.
Glad to have you, Julie. We only have 45 minutes for this talk, so we'll dig into as much as we can. Before we do that, Antonia, how about you?
Thank you, JP. Yes, my name is Antonia Dieterich, and I work at Daimler Trucks as a personnel manager. But I'm actually here at this panel because I wrote my bachelor's thesis on the integration of data science techniques into competitive intelligence. So I come from a research kind of background and have just gotten into the topic of competitive intelligence overall recently. And I kind of researched how data science techniques fit into the different stages of the intelligence cycle. And by talking to different experts from a lot of different companies throughout my thesis, I found out that the current state of the art is mostly applying data science techniques and technology in general to the preparation stage of the information. And I wondered why it's not applied in the analysis part. And one of the problems that I came across is that we don't have artificial general intelligence yet. So machine learning algorithms are like really good at completing one specific task, but not necessarily drawing logical conclusions from those tasks. And so it's hard to apply them to the actual analysis step. And the other one is that we don't have a lot of data available in the future, right? So we have very small data sets and not a lot of machine learning algorithms that can work with that. So I think it's going to be really exciting looking to the future of competitive intelligence, seeing how it starts to work with smaller data sets and how it starts to get into the analysis kind of step of the intelligence cycle and enhances that with artificial intelligence.
That's excellent. And we were commenting before we all started going live here that the tools that we have to use for competitive intelligence are changing. There aren't standards. There's not one set of measurements that we use. And the converse was Bob's wall, right? So he pulled off a wrench and showed us, and forever, you know, a screw is going to have the same shape. Not so much the case with CI. So before we get started, let's kind of go back to the very basics here. So the title is Technology in the Intel Cycle. So for those of us who are on this webinar at the summit who don't understand or don't know what the intelligence cycle is, well, it's a little bit nebulous, right? So depending on who you talk to, it could have 4 stages, it could have 5, it could have 6, it could have more than that. But essentially, the main components of the intelligence cycle are having direction, collection, processing, analysis, dissemination, and then feedback, right? So I got those, I think I said 6, right? But the idea is that some of these are already being covered by tools that we have. In one of the previous presentations, we talked about what part of that does a tool really help with, and the primary and secondary collection was, I think it was 43% of people said that that's one of the main reasons that they use a CI tool right now. So we'll dive into some of those ways, some of those pieces that aren't necessarily covered. But before we get into that, there's something I think we all need to talk about, and it's something that is, you know, in our time frame right now today, maybe not something that we're dealing with very much unless we're playing something like Roblox, or if we are perhaps watching the news a lot, because just within the past week, Facebook had some pretty big announcements about the metaverse. So raise your hand if you've heard about the metaverse. You know what that is, right? Okay, so metaverse is essentially this online place, this platform that will enable us to pull together a lot of things. But that's a very poor way of explaining it. Bob, you're really smart about the metaverse. Maybe you can start us off with a little bit of explanation.
Yes, I think the short way of putting this is the metaverse is the next generation of the internet. So let me go deep back and give you some more background, though. The metaverse as a word was first introduced in a science fiction book in 1994 called Snow Crash, where the hero, the protagonist, was going into a virtual world, and it was as if he was there. And this metaverse was expressed in such a clear way in this science fiction that ever since then, computer scientists and practitioners and gamers have wanted to build this metaverse. And it's been decades in the making, but we're getting so close now. Metaverse type descriptions were also in other science fiction books like Neuromancer. William Gibson described a consensual hallucination shared by billions. So very mind-expanding kind of descriptions of the metaverse. More recently, we have been talking, the community, been talking about a metaverse that is an extension of these virtual worlds that we see in gaming. You mentioned a few. Fortnite is another very famous one, a Decentraland and others. But these are all kind of standalone things, standalone virtual worlds. There are other standalone virtual worlds that are also important, like digital twins, where companies are creating a total replica of their infrastructure that operates as if it's real, but it's virtual. And it allows them to make changes and simulate and model things before making a purchase or a major design decision. Industries are doing that as well. Manufacturing plants are creating total digital twins. Smart cities are creating total digital twins. All of these are virtual worlds. And there's other virtual worlds that are just collaborative environments to help businesses get along and conduct business. One other virtual world that's important is in education. There's education software that runs on things like the Oculus Rift or other 3D environments where you can jump in and travel to another planet or go back in time and talk to a famous historical person. So all of these are separate virtual worlds. The metaverse brings all of that together into one interoperable platform where there's persistence and there's a store of value and a way to transact and do business. It is, in many people's vision, the future of education, the future of healthcare, the future of retail. You go in and shop in this virtual world, you buy something, you try it on, you buy something, and then it's sent to your house in the real world. So the metaverse is coming. It's really coming. And we, as in competitive intelligence professionals, need to think, hey, is there information about my company that I don't want people to see in the metaverse? Is there information about other companies that will be publicly available if I just get into the metaverse? And are there tools and people I can talk to? Can I do interviews of people in the metaverse and learn about the market in new ways? Absolutely, you can. This could be revolutionary for our craft.
So if you've had trouble collecting information, processing it, doing any of that in the real world, you're telling us we now have two worlds that we're going to have to do this in?
Right. But I think it's going to be even better, especially for introverts like me. I can pick up a phone, I can do a Zoom call, but going in and talking to a person, you probably want someone with a different skill set. And talking to people is so very important when you're doing competitive intelligence. What about in the metaverse? Maybe I'd be more comfortable doing that because I will be an avatar of whatever I want to be. And I will ask somebody for their opinion. And, it's extremely important to be ethical, even in the metaverse. You'll want to disclose that, hey, I've been engaged to do a research project and I have, 3 questions. Can I ask you about this? But, you can do it in a way that is comfortable for you and comfortable for the person you're interviewing. And there's just so many benefits, I think, to our art and craft of being able to interact with people globally in this virtual 3D world.
Now, if it's a platform that brings together all kinds of different companies, all kinds of different tools together in one place, it's going to be hard to kind of regulate that, almost like wild, wild west, like we might think of. So I think, Julie, maybe we'll get your take on it. What does that mean for things like verifying information, verifying the credentials, being able to trust people when it comes to interacting in the metaverse?
That's a huge one, JP.
We've got like 1 minute.
One of the things that I think is going to be really crucial is people, exactly as Bob said, having that clarity as to who people are will be even harder. In today's world, we know there's a huge debate raging as to the whole spectrum between anonymity, pseudonymity, and verification. And I think we will see that transposed in this world as well. We also know in today's world, we have, say, about 20% in some parts of the world, 25% of a country under the age of 18. And we know a lot of those people are attracted from a very early age into areas which aren't appropriate. So that's one of the challenges that we're looking at, speaking with designers and the design community as to how you can develop and deliver from the ground up age-appropriate experiences. But thinking of it in your world, how do you look at the people representing you to see that they are represented with the right credentials? We, for instance, during COVID, helped the NHS that was hiring people remotely and then maybe having them go from hospital A to B to C to be able to have an employment credential digitally. Think of that in this world, that you need to know that this is definitely somebody, this is their profession, this is their role, these are their qualifications, and then enable them to go into certain areas virtually, physically, and to represent you in the right way. So there's a lot of things there that I think we can look at, but there's interesting, I think some of the trust frameworks that are being developed now will be really helpful. And looking at projects like the Edelman Trust Index, it's even more important that companies do look at those elements of trust. Hard to win, easy to lose, and thinking about that public interest angle and the disclosure angle are really key. There's some really great work by Hilary Sutcliffe that I'll put a link to, which talks about all the different elements that companies need to do online and in tech companies to build trust. And it's a really good work. But yeah, I'd be delighted to hear also if Antonia has some interesting angles on that. But
I was thinking too, Antonia, so is this metaverse, as this digital world that we're interacting in, especially from an analysis standpoint, does it become easier to start to take this information that we have and start to do things with it, to process it, to turn it into something? Or maybe we got an entirely different take on it.
I think it's going to have a lot of new possibilities, that for sure, because we're going to be able to interact with the information in an entirely different way, if I understand correctly. And we're going to be, closer to it, being able to draw that in. I think some of the challenges are still going to persist because this is mainly about how we present it to the users, right? So it's obviously all connected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that it's going to be easier to access information, because there's still going to be barriers pulled up by the companies, as you said earlier, Bob. I think it was companies don't want everything out in the open, so they're still going to try to protect their data. So I think that's something that's going to persist as an issue for us as competitive intelligence professionals. But I do think that the way we process data in the future is going to change drastically by the metaverse. How we're going to incorporate that into our data lakes and how we're going to draw that data in, I don't really know how that's going to affect that. But I think one thing that is going to stay similar for sure is that we're still going to work with a lot of unstructured data and competitive intelligence, and that's going to continue to be a challenge because the way of working with it is just so different, and we're still going to have to, kind of cope with the issues that we're facing now, that processing the data and turn it into something that's machine readable is going to be hard.
Bob, Julie, any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Julie.
no, please, after you.
Well, there's so many things that we need to talk about now, I think. One is competitive intelligence. We abbreviate it CI. There's another CI, counterintelligence. And that is, protecting information. And I think increasingly companies need to be aware of that. It's far more than just cybersecurity and computer security. It's more information security. How do I protect my business decisions from exploitation by adversaries and governments and others? And as the world modernizes around us and the internet morphs into the metaverse, what is going to leak out there that we don't want leaking? How do we watch our infosec there is a whole train of thought we need to talk about. And Antonia mentioned kind of small data. This is another major theme that would occur with or without the metaverse. How do you understand something based on just a small amount of data instead of the terabytes of data? And this is a very serious field of research that I'm glad to see progress is being made, but a lot more progress needs to be made. And I think that's going to inform competitive intelligence professionals across every aspect of the intelligence cycle. And one other thing I want to mention is the intelligence cycle, I think, is incredibly useful for introducing new people to intelligence. But the more we use it, we're like doing all of those things all at once. And it's like the intelligence scrum. It's like everything is occurring all at once. And we need tools that can help us do it all at once. The planning, collection, analysis, dissemination, and the fact checking and assumption checking and modeling and simulation. So for that reason, I think it leads to maybe we need new models for how we do competitive intelligence in the future. And those new models may drive how we use tools and the tools we select.
There'll be no shortage of the need to change and adapt and live within these new environments that we're presented with. Is that what you're saying, Bob?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's well, first off, anything else on the metaverse? I know we spent a lot of time on this, and this is great. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about what we should be looking out for. Anything else in terms of, we've covered kind of how we're going to be able to gather or protect our own information, but any other ways to think about how we might hand out information, how we might distribute it in such an environment like that we may or may not have the tools for right now?
I put a little link in, JP, which is at a tangent to that. It's looking at what the different levels of anonymity, pseudonymity, and verification could be. And you will have instances when you want to fit in different ones of those camps, and instances where that is permissible and not. So I think understanding those different levels is something that all the platforms are looking at the moment. Understanding when you are representing your own person entity is one thing, representing a non-person entity or company is also different. How do we be sure that this is someone definitely from Daimler or definitely from Bob's company? How does that company track who is acting on its behalf? In the chat, someone also asked the question, how do they know when people in their company have done different things, signed an NDA or uploaded a document or undertaken some training? And one of the things that we've looked at internally is using some of those e-signature and verification products that we provide already to other companies in our internal workings. And we're seeing more companies ask for different flavors of that. So, could be just as simple as somebody having done their GDPR training, or if they're sharing on behalf of the company a document which is to the tax office or a document to an external publication, you might have certain levels of verification required. So it's not me writing on Antonia's behalf.
Yeah, that idea of trust is so important. If we think about social media and how that's become ingrained in how we collect or how we just live our daily lives, we've had to verify users and information a lot more than we had to, say, 20 years ago, right? When there were only mainstream media outlets and that kind of stuff reporting information to us. So Regina asked a good question here. And Joy, I think you'd be well positioned to answer this, is whose job should it be to verify the identities of the users? Is that incumbent on, I'm kind of paraphrasing now, but is that incumbent on us as practitioners to do? Is it up to companies like yours to help solve that problem? What is it?
It's interesting. So there's a school of thought which is that a consumer or an individual can come already checked. So for instance, you can have organizations now for where you can go and prove that you're a good person to rent a flat. So I haven't trashed the joint, I've paid on time, I've been a good tenant. So you can build up your portfolio and your track record of being good to rent. You can also now start to build up your portfolio of being good to hire. And this is definitely you, and this is definitely your track record. And that is the individual taking that with them, versus having other instances where a company is wanting to hire you and they do those checks, and they might do that from the get-go without wanting to rely on what you've provided. I think we're going to have different forms of that triangulation. There'll be instances where you want to be ready to go and at the front of queue to hire a property. So you say, I'm going to do all my homework, have all my guarantors, my previous track record, and I'm going to be at the front of the queue by having that ready to go. And similarly, if I'm then looking at which of the 10 people I want to rent my flat to, I'm probably likely to pick the few that have already done their homework and shown they're eager and willing and have that ready to go. And that's also cheaper for me. So I think we will see this evolving whereby it's the individual or the company specifying the rules of the road. And we'll also see where people have a differential degree of how much they're happy to share. We've seen instances where, for example, in the job market, people are putting up fake job adverts. So as an applicant, I really want to know that this is a bona fide job advert and not somebody that's just trying to fleece my CV and personal details. So it will cut both ways. You'll have both consumers wanting to know they're dealing with verified businesses and business wanting to know they're dealing with verified individuals. You know, sometimes people ring you up asking for information and you have to be careful. You are actually dealing with that bank or that organization. So in many different instances, both parties are having to prove and earn their trust.
So what I love about having a panel like this with such varied insights and different backgrounds and expertises. This is great. Thanks, Julie. Any other comments on the metaverse before we maybe shift to something else?
You know, I did want to say that I think it's very enjoyable listening to Julie talk about this because we need to put a lot more thought into it. And I think there's some interactions that we will want to have on the Interverse completely anonymous in the metaverse. Others will want to be pseudonymous, but maybe build up a 7, 8, 10-year track record of being, you know, you don't know who I am, but you know these are my behaviors and I'm a consistent person. And others where you would want to know exactly who I am, and I would want you to know that. And as we think through those, I want to mention one other thing. And I know everybody may have a different opinion on this, but I believe there's a great struggle underway in the world today between totalitarian nations, surveillance states, kleptocracies, communist nations, and the more free, open Western societies. And the surveillance states, they want all this information so they can know exactly who is saying what and what they're doing. And China is now exporting their technologies that do that to other totalitarian nations, which look up to China and their ability to conduct surveillance of any dissidents. And this is a new online struggle too. And now think of that in the metaverse. There's going to be folks from free enterprise, capitalist, open societies that have one vision of the metaverse, and then folks from totalitarian regimes that have a different vision for the metaverse. Whose is going to win? I want ours to win, and but it remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. This is not something that's going to happen tomorrow, though. So, in your expert opinions, what do you think? How soon should we be expecting something like this to start coming together? We've mentioned that there are some companies that are putting tens of thousands of people to work on this. Roblox, for example, has over 1 million developers, and they're helping them create this kind of universe. So what kind of timing are we looking for something like this?
I think it's time to remember the William Gibson quote, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." So we're seeing what it's going to look like, but it's not here yet. Give it 3 to 5 years for it to really, really, really be here. And for a transaction layer, it looks like that's probably going to be Ethereum, for example. Folks are gravitating towards that. A lot of work needs to be done before you can use Ethereum on every virtual world, for example. So I'd say it's here in places already, but the real metaverse, give it 3 to 5 years.
Book your calendars. We'll all be here in 2025. You good with that, Julie, Antonia? You good?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Right. So, Antonia, you're very much on the cutting edge when it comes to analytic techniques and how those apply to competitive intelligence professionals, what we can do with them. What are some of the topics that you see becoming very important to us in the future that we need to know about, that we should be anticipating, kind of like the metaverse? Maybe not to that scale, but what are some of the other things in your research that you're finding?
Yeah, so it's not quite as abstract maybe to grasp as the metaverse, but something that I think is going to come into play, even if the metaverse is there, is small data sets, because the data that is available about the future is very limited, right? We don't have a lot of data to work with. And the problem with traditional machine learning algorithms is that they train on a lot of data to be able to make accurate predictions. And since small data sets don't provide that, the predictions that they're going to be making are going to be biased and off. And so I've been looking into some techniques to kind of deal with smaller data sets. And it's interesting because kind of similar to what Bob said is the future is here already. Like there are techniques to deal with that. There are things like one-shot learning, where algorithms work with really limited data, like maybe 20 data sets, and are able to get really good results and work way better with that than traditional machine learning algorithms that we are applying right now. And one way of doing that is, for example, the neural Turing machine, which has an external memory, which is like a 2D matrix. And it has a write head and a read head, and calculates weights that it uses to assign like spots, it writes, what information it got from the outside. And using that external memory, that kind of augments the traditional machine learning algorithm to work more like a human would, and learn from a data set, in one shot, and then apply that to future predictions. And I think that is not necessarily applicable, off the shelf or the get-go to competitive intelligence, but it is a way that we can kind of get closer to human intelligence. And ultimately, that's kind of what we would need in competitive intelligence, like a more general intelligence that is able to draw conclusions. And by getting closer to that human intelligence, I think, and looking to other fields such as cognitive sciences, that kind of get into the whole how human brains work and how we can replicate that. I think that's going to be a very interesting development in dealing with the kind of data that we have in competitive intelligence, using that to make predictions in that book.
Mm-hmm. In the last session, there was some talk about no code and low code abilities to be able to build tools and stuff like that. And so John and Christian were talking about how there's still a lot of work that has to go into to be able to build an interface or something like that. When you're thinking about all these, being able to take small data and be able to apply algorithms or different modeling processes to things like that, who is it that's going to be doing that, Antonia? Is it, you said it's not going to be the analyst necessarily that's sitting down and doing that?
You mean who's going to be developing those algorithms to work with?
Yeah, who is it? Is it large corporations? Is it people working? Who's it going to be?
So I know that the original idea for the neural Turing machine was developed by DeepMind, like a company owned by Google or bought by Google. So I think companies that have a lot of capital and a lot of AI specialists, those are really going to be the ones developing that, which is why it is so important for a field like CI to look to other disciplines. And I read recently that there is actually a very, very limited number of people in this world. I think it was like something under 10,000 that are capable of developing those advanced AI algorithms. And a lot of those people kind of reside in the Silicon Valley, obviously. And so I think it's not going to be like every small company that is going to have the ability to develop something like that, because it is very advanced and very new still. Like it took until 2018 for someone else to kind of replicate the code that DeepMind had developed, because they didn't publish their source code. So to really apply that back to other disciplines, a lot of people are going to have to work together, and it's going to be a lot about sharing that information and allowing others to help develop it further. It's not going to be kind of a one-man thing, so we're all really going to have to work together and work together within different disciplines.
Well, I imagine we'll probably see that as something that's very expensive and eventually kind of trickles down over time, right? Bob, curious from your perspective, from the government side, is this something that is being worked on as well? What kind of takes are you seeing from there?
I'm not seeing enough, frankly. I'm trying to track what I can about artificial intelligence in the government and what its plan is, and machine learning, and conversations around big data, of course, which have been there for over a decade, and small data, as Antonio is helping us understand, is so very important. I am starting to see some conversations, but they're just beginning. There's a Georgetown University group called CSET, and CSET has been writing about small data, and it's writing about it in a way that makes me think competitive intelligence professionals need to track. It will become more and more useful to us. And other than that, I think this is an important field where we need to start pulling together and tracking the research. And as for me, my goal is just to read everything Antonia writes about this.
I think that's a good goal for all of us. Antonia, when's the book coming out?
I'm hoping to publish parts of my thesis. I'm hoping it works out. If it does, I'm gonna let you know.
Having seen your thesis, I would definitely recommend you publish that soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolving so quickly, right? So I haven't actually talked that much about small data sets in my thesis because it was something that came out of talking to different experts. And I just kind of, looked at it afterwards because I thought it was really interesting and it was like a really interesting research direction. Yeah, but I haven't even gotten into that yet. And it's just kind of, it evolves so quickly. Technology evolves so quickly, and we really need to embrace that in order to include it into competitive intelligence. It kind of needs to be a partnership, right?
Yeah. I'll encourage everyone, we have a few more minutes left. If you have questions or comments, throw them into the chat. I'm seeing a lot of conversation going on. It's fantastic. All you panelists will get to go back and read all this afterwards. So if you have anything, toss it in there. I've got a few more minutes to ask these experts anything you want. And there's some good ones about your book series. It's coming up, Antonia. So it's not just a thesis now. You now have like a whole series of books. So that said, we've talked a little bit about collection, whether that be in the metaverse or in the real world right now. We've talked about things like analysis and how it's important. Julie, I want to pop it back over to you. So let's talk about, we talked a lot about credentials and being trustworthy and exchanging information. What do you think what do you think the future holds for things like not only collecting information, but making sure that it's brokered in a maybe not a fair way, but in the way that data is brokered? You're an expert in this field. What are the kind of things that we have to be looking forward to from there?
It's really interesting. In the last few days, we've all been watching the after the effect whistleblower, and how we're sort of almost getting a crowdsourcing approach to ethics through that. So obviously the trust and governance structures haven't worked for certain platforms over this last period. And if we're looking forward to the metaverse, one of the things I think we might have to have is a different form of almost crowdsourced ethics. So we as a small company have chosen to have an internal trust and ethics group with people from every team and an external one. But when you're looking at something the size of a global platform, or when we're talking about the size of this future metaverse, one of the things that I think is the only way will be almost a bottom-up GitHub version, and maybe people that are internal within the development actually also having a way to express their concerns and issues. How else can we look at the governance for this? So I'm trying to look at what that balance is between individual humans and what they can spot. What are the tech measures you have to put in? Because I don't think you can have tech problems that are solved just manually, but how do we have that hybrid? How do we look at what the redress methods are? How do we look at what can be inbuilt in terms of risk assessments and review structures? And how can we broker that governance? So I don't have all the answers, but I think it's been really instructive for people around the world in the last days to understand what are the things you only know if you're really inside the nuts and bolts and weeds of a corporation, and you've been prepared to take a huge risk to express those. So there's different learnings there. From our companies, we have to think, on the one hand, if we are doing things the right way, how do we keep our secrets secret? But if we're not doing the right things the right way, think that human nature will probably be that those will get out. And then how do we, looking at this metaverse, look at how that is something that doesn't go on the surveillance angle that Bob was describing and take our democracies in a route that we don't want them to go? but how at the same time do we let our companies flourish and make a profit and do what they're designed to do. So there's lots of things to balance. I'd be keen to hear if any of the other people on the call have different views as to how we might look at this ethical conundrum and the governance angle.
Bob, I can see the wheels turning in your head. Go ahead.
I am. And one thing that always comes back to me is we all need to remind ourselves that we are never going to be like our adversaries. Ethics are extremely important. Ethics is what competitive intelligence professionals are all about. It's just a second nature for us, and it's part of our community. And I think by extension, we want our in all of our enterprises and the technologists building the metaverse and our governments to remember the ethics angle too. And there's going to be some tough challenges here as we sort through this. Like a lot of people believe that Facebook would be the wrong company to build the metaverse, but they've got the money and the engineers, and they're doing it. So these, I think maybe here's the point, and this just builds off what Julie just said, I think, but we need to decide what we want out of the metaverse. Let's come up with our requirements. We expect this to be a place where ethics is respected and human rights are respected, even virtual human rights. So we need to learn about the metaverse so we can come up with what our requirements are for that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I see Elise just mentioned that it puts pressure on all of us on the call to help define that, to learn about CI, to know what potential pitfalls and warning signs are. We need to be aware of what's going on around us. So I want to really quickly thank all of our panelists. I'm going to try to keep Cynthia off the line as long as possible here so we can keep talking. But if we could, maybe just let's wrap up with a minute of thoughts, and let's go around the horn. Maybe stuff we talked about today, what we haven't got to talk about it, but we're really interested in. And so when we come back in 2025, we can bring it back together. So Bob, we'll start with you, then Julie, then Antonia. Okay.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's what an honor to talk with you guys and learn from you. And I also want to say I like this construct that Antonia has been helping us think through of small data. And all of us should spend as much time thinking about small data as we do the metaverse. I really, really believe that. But we do need to think about the metaverse and what our requirements are so we can influence and shape that.
Excellent. Julie.
I've been really humbled today, likewise, from each different area, from specifically your research, Antonia, but also the practices and approaches you have, the fact. It's gone slightly blank, but I hope you can hear me. Thank you hugely for that opportunity. I will go away and think more about how identity verification could play a role. And look forward to keeping some of these connections alive. Thank you.
Antonia?
Just as my two fellow panelists, I am honored to be here today, and I was honored to discuss with you. And definitely, there were so many thoughtful points that you made, and I definitely have a lot to think about going away from this discussion. And I think it's going to continue to be just so important to have, open sources and just have an open information flow so we can all profit from the advances of other disciplines. And the other thing that I think is going to be incredibly important in the future, with the metaverse coming, small data becoming more important, network analysis, which is, we couldn't get into that, but it's also going to be like a very interesting part in the future. And with all of that coming, I think to ultimately bridge the gap between the intelligence cycle and data science technology, artificial intelligence, we're just going to have to fuse those two together. We're going to have AI in every step of that intelligence cycle to really build a partnership and profit from that in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've all set the bar incredibly high. And to your point, Julie, about us all coming together, it's going to take many of us to be thinking about this. And it's not something that we're going to solve in a 45-minute panel. So this is, I'm sure, where Cynthia's going to come in and say, hey, make sure that you continue this conversation in our community of practice. That link will probably pop up in the chat here in a little bit. Maybe we can even call it something like the Fellows Verse instead of like the Metaverse or something. maybe. But I want to say thank you to all of you for all of your insights. This was incredible to pull you all together. To all those listening, to all the chat and conversation that's been going on, really appreciate it. And that wraps up our session for Technology and the Intelligence Cycle.
Yes, yes. Thank you all. And I'm actually posting the link to the COP. And so we look forward to continuing this, because we certainly, but by no means have we solved this problem. We've actually managed to ask more questions. So the link is going up there. And thank you very much, JP, for leading this discussion, a very thought-provoking discussion with Julie, Antonia, and Bob. I just keep nodding my head and smiling throughout this, even though I was off screen. And I know that my colleagues here and looking at the chat was certainly feeling the same way. And I think a few of us have been buying you virtual drinks. So we look forward to seeing you on the COP as well. So please do join us. And in the meantime, why don't you join us too at a random networking break? So that's going on. So those of you who are in there, just go into the random networking break section and see which colleagues you can run across and meet and make new connections. And don't forget too, speaking of connections, that the fellows, the speakers and fellows also have LinkedIn links to each of the speaker lists on the platform. So please do reach out to the various panelists and speakers and moderators if you have any questions and just want to connect as well. So thank you all very much.